Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. Today's video is part 2 of our stylized cartoon bear sculpt. We're going to finish off what we started in part 1 to end up with something like this. Card to part 1 should be up in the top corner if I don't forget. This video series is a little bit more beginner focused and slower paced. In case you missed it, in part 1 we went over some built-in Blender add-ons that I've enabled, the modifier tools, tri-lighting, and node wrangler add-ons. These help making working in Blender a little bit easier. We also went over some general viewport settings, as well as some of the restriction toggles over in the layer panel. Then we completed the rough blockout to end up with something like this. A model made up of several separate spheres and cylinders we roughly sculpted into shape. This will be the starting point for today's video. I uploaded some reference images to my Dropbox to help with this first blockout stage in case you wanted a rough guide. In this second part, we will join all the separate objects together, sculpt in some simple details around the face and nose, add in some lights with the tri-lighting add-on, and then add some color to finish it off. Okay, let's jump in. Okay, so picking up where we left off, let's hold shift and select the middle parts of the body, the snout, head, chest, back, and hips. To join them, it's quite easy. Just press Ctrl J. Now you'll notice that all the separate objects are now one. To sculpt in some details, I like to use the Voxel Remesh function, which retopologizes your model in a more uniform fashion for better sculpting. Let's press Tab to toggle into edit mode, and we can now see the vertices of our model. They are quite spaced out, which means we won't get much detail when sculpting. To fix this, let's press Ctrl Tab for the Mode Pie menu and go into Sculpt mode. I'm going to select the Clay Strips brush over on the left, and then make sure my X symmetry is on. When I go to sculpt with the clay brush, you'll notice that it looks quite pixelated and blocky, and not much detail is achieved. To get more detail, you can go up to the Voxel Remesh function here. The voxel size is what determines the level of detail in sculpting. And so with the eyedropper tool here, I'm going to click on the model to see what our current voxel size is. You can see we are currently at a voxel size of about 0.23 meters. The lower the voxel size, the more detail you can achieve. So let's lower the voxel size here from 0.23 to 0.1 meters, and then go down and press the Remesh button. You'll notice the model is all one color now, meaning it is one uniform voxel size, which is better. When I tab into edit mode, we can see that the topology has changed a bit. It is more uniform throughout, and the number of vertices has increased, as you can see down in the bottom right corner. When there are more vertices, we can achieve more detail. Now when I use the Clay Strips brush again, it looks a little less pixelated and blocky, which is great. We have some jagged artifacts where the previously separated objects overlapped. To smooth these out, let's press / on the keyboard for local view to isolate just the body in the viewport, and then you can select the smooth brush on the left and go over the creases to smooth everything out. A really handy shortcut is when you have any brush selected, in this case I'll pick the Clay Strips brush on the left, and hold the shift button. It turns whatever brush you have selected into the smooth brush. I use this shortcut a lot, maybe too much. So now you can go ahead and smooth the rest of the model that way. Another way to smooth things is by using the mesh filter option here. Then up to the filter type, you can select smooth. And then clicking and pulling to the right in the viewport, it will give you a nice uniform smooth over the entire object, which is a nice quick and easy way to smooth. Okay, let's / again to get out of local view. Now let's join up the legs and paws. You'll notice when you go to Ctrl J, a mirrored object with a non-mirrored object, the mirrored object will lose its other half. To fix this, we need to apply the mirror modifier. Applying a modifier basically locks it in and finalizes it, so you can't make any more changes. Since we have several objects that have a mirror modifier on them, let's shift select them all, the legs, paws, and ears. Now we can make use of the modifier tools add-on we enabled earlier, which gives us the apply all button here. With all the objects selected, press the Apply All button and it will apply all of the modifiers on all of the selected objects. This saves you from having to go through and manually apply each modifier on each object, which depending on how complicated your model is can be quite time consuming. Okay, with the legs, paws, and ears still selected, let's shift select the body and press Ctrl J to join everything. Now all of this is one object. And like before, let's Control Tab into Sculpt mode to Voxel, Remesh, and Smooth. If you are in Blender version 2.9, instead of going up to the Remesh function in the top right, you can just press Shift R to set the voxel size. And then to perform the voxel remesh, you just have to press Control R. Okay, it looks okay, but the artifacts along the creases are quite big, which I'm not a huge fan of. So let's press Shift R and lower the voxel size again. And then press Control R to perform the voxel remesh. Now the artifacts along the creases are a little bit smaller, which I like more. And now we can go ahead and smooth like we did before by holding Shift with any of the sculpt brushes. Okay, with everything smooth, let's sculpt in some details around the face. I'm going to start with the sculpt draw brush up here. You'll notice as I sculpt up here, this is the default behavior of the brush. It kind of gives a thin raised line as you go. But if you hold Control with any brush, it inverts it. So holding Control with the same brush, we now have a thin sunken line. I'm going to use this feature to dig out some eye sockets around the eyes. / again to isolate the view to get a better view of the shape on the eye socket. Now anytime I make some changes to the mesh and the topology starts to become less uniform or stretched, I like to press Ctrl R to voxel remesh and make everything uniform again. So I'm going to do that here. Now over to the elastic deform brush and pulling the brows down a bit. Also going to pull the nose bridge in a little as well. You can change the size of the brush by pressing F to get different levels of control. Now for the brow, let's switch to the clay strips brush and start sculpting in a brow bone above the eye. It's a little weak for me, so I'm going to press Shift F to increase the strength of the brush. Then Control R to voxel remesh again and clean up the topology a bit. Then more smoothing with Shift. / again to get out of local view. Now let's reposition the eyes better into the eye socket. A tool I use a lot when sculpting is the Mask tool. You can press M on your keyboard or click down here. Now I'm going to paint in the shape of the inner ear like this. This blacked out portion will not be affected by any brush you use. So you'll notice when I use the deform brush, the masked off section I just painted doesn't move at all. Now to get the inner ear part sort of dug out, I'm going to press Ctrl I to invert the sculpt mask. So now any brush will only affect the inner ear triangle. So you can dig out this portion in a few different ways. One way is to use the move tool down here, the little icon with 4 arrows. Now you can pull it back like this. Or you can just use the deform or grab brush and pull it back like this. This way you can adjust it a little bit as well, like this, by adjusting the brush size and pulling it inwards. Now let's Shift R to lower the voxel size a bit. If you can't see the numbers, you can either zoom out in the viewport or just eyeball it using the size of the squares. Again, the smaller the squares or smaller the voxel size, the more detail you'll have. And then you can press Ctrl R to voxel remesh again and also clear the sculpt mask at the same time. For the bottom jaw, we can do something similar to the ear, mask tool for the shape, Control I to invert, deform brush to extrude out, Control R to remesh and clear the sculpt mask at the same time, then just some smoothing with Shift. For the mouth, same thing again basically, mask tool for the shape, Control I to invert. You can also use the mesh filter tool again, but this time go up to the filter type menu and select inflate. Now when you pull to the left or right in the viewport, it will basically extrude in or out. Then you can press Control R to remesh and clear the sculpt mask. Here I wanted to add in a little bit of meat behind the jaw as it was looking a little bit too square. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to see in tight spaces like this, so to make it easier, you can press Alt-B to set a view region like this. Now when I orbit, I can see the back side of the jaw a little bit more clearly. Then just some more clay strips brush to fill it out a bit. Then Alt-B again to clear the view region and get back to normal. Now onto the snout, similar to the ear and mouth, sculpt mask tool for the shape behind the nose. Control I to invert, then the mesh inflate filter to create a little indent for the nose. Onto the nose itself, Shift R to lower the voxel size for some more detail, then Control R. Now I'm going to use the scrape brush on the front and sides to start making a little bit more angular and stylized. Then moving on to the face, staying with the scrape brush on the front and sides of the brow to make it a little bit more stylized and angular as well. Now I'm going to switch to the clay strips brush to give some small, subtle bone structure details to the head like this. Holding Control to invert the brush and dig out a bit on the forehead. Now I'm going to go back to the deform brush and pull the snout out a bit more to make it more in line with the nose. They sort of strayed apart a little bit with all the other adjustments. Now back to the face, and with the clay strips brush I'm going to accentuate the cheekbones a bit. And then also filling in the eye socket a little bit more as well. Now let's add some details to the nose. With the inverted sculpt draw brush, let's dig out some nostrils. Control R to remesh and smooth things out. Now with the clay strips brush, I'm going to start laying down some geometry in between the nostrils and then down and outwards. I'm going to leave a little space in between here. Then smoothing things out. Switching to the crease brush now along the side and then down the middle. I'm remeshing and smoothing as I go here as well. Now some more clay strips brush and accentuating the flaps a little bit more. And then now holding Control to invert the crease brush to accentuate the lines and edges a little bit more. More smoothing, digging, and pulling to get the final look I want. Okay, now I'm just going to add in a plane for the bear to kind of sit on. Numpad 7 for top view, Shift A and adding in a plane, then scaling upwards with S. Then I'm going to tab into edit mode, select all the vertices by pressing A or just box select, and then press E to extrude it a bit downwards. This way I can see it a little bit more clearly when I'm in orthographic view. Then selecting the bear and just using the deform brush and making it really large to pull the whole body down a bit in line with the plane. Hold Control and Numpad 7 for bottom orthographic view, and then the scrape brush to flatten out the bottom of the body a bit. And then some final adjustments to line it up with the plane a little bit better. Okay, now let's add in some minor details on the paws. Here I'm going to make use of the mask tool again and the mesh inflate filter like we did before. Painting in some triangular shapes like this to sort of emulate a cartoony toe. Then Control I to invert, mesh filter tool, inflate filter type, and then expand the mesh out a bit. Then just a bunch of smoothing. Then onto the back paw. Here I want to make it a little bit more flat and angular. So I'm going to make use of the Lasso Mask tool and Mask Slice function. Numpad 7 for top view, then up to the mask menu here. Let's select the Lasso Mask tool here, or you can just press Shift, Control, and then left mouse button. Then draw a shape like this to mask off the end of the paw. Now back up to the mask menu, I'm going to select the Mask Slice and Fill Holes function. You'll notice now that the area that we masked off has now been sliced off, and any hole in the mesh that would have resulted was automatically filled in. Now we can just press Ctrl R to remesh and clear the mask at the same time, and we have a flattened surface for the bottom of the paw. Now just the same thing as we did for the front paw. Mask tool and painting in some triangular shapes for the toes. Control I to invert. Mesh filter tool, inflate filter, expanding out a bit, and then smoothing to make it a little bit more gradual. For the pads on the bottom of the paw, I'm going to paint in a mask like this using the mask tool. Control I to invert, mesh filter, and then inflate inwards a bit. Now I'm going to press Control I again to invert back to our original position, and then up to the mask menu. This time I'm going to select the mask extract function. What this does is it takes the area you just masked off and creates a new separate mesh with a mask extract modifier on it to the right. Here you can adjust the thickness if you'd like. I want to sculpt this new object a bit, so I'm going to apply the modifier to lock it in at the thickness that I've set. Then Control Tab into sculpt mode. Alt-M to clear the mask, then back to the Mesh filter tool and the Inflate filter type. It looks a little jagged, so I'm going to switch to the Smooth filter type to smooth it all out. Smoothing made the pads a little bit too small though, so I'm going to go back to the Inflate filter and inflate it back up a bit. And then some more smoothing and inflating to dial in the look that I want. Okay, now for some final details on the face. Let's Control Tab into sculpt mode and then use the snake hook tool. This brush is a lot of fun. It's great for creating hair. Here I'll use it to create some large stylized fur strands on the side of the face. Control R to remesh and clean up the topology since it gets a little stretched with this brush. Here I'm pressing Shift A and adding in a rounded cube with radius 1 and 16 arc divisions, and then using the deform brush to shape it into a tongue. I thought I would add in something fun for our bear to look at and sort of set a scene. There's a fun little monkey head that is built into the software that you can add as its own mesh. Just press Shift A and under the mesh menu you'll see an item called monkey. As per the Blender Wikipedia page, this was added in 2002 as a sort of Easter egg and last personal tag of the artists and developers. The model was named Suzanne after the orangutan in the Kevin Smith film Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Suzanne is often used as a quick and easy way to test materials, animations, rigs, textures, and lighting setups. Here I'll move it into place, shade smooth under the object menu, and then add a subdivision surface modifier to smooth it out a bit. Now for some simple lighting. For the shading mode, I'm going to switch to rendered. You can switch which shading mode you are in up here in the top right. We've been in solid mode so far. There is also a material preview and rendered view, and also a wireframe. You can also switch modes a little quicker by pressing Z on your keyboard and then selecting from the pie menu that pops up. I'm going to make use of the Tri-Lighting add-on I mentioned earlier. The add-on automatically focuses the 3 lights on the object you've selected at the time you add the lights. Because of this, I like to first create what's called an empty object first. Empty objects are single coordinate points with no volume or surface, so as a result they cannot be rendered and are commonly used as a reference point within the viewport. So that's exactly how we'll use them right now. So Shift A down to empty. I'm just going to select plane axes. It doesn't matter what you pick here. I'm going to rename it Focus Point Lights. Now with that object selected, let's press Shift A, Light, and then 3-point lights. You'll see 3 new light objects appear over on the right. I don't see anything in my viewport right away since they are actually inside the model. So quickly switching to solid mode, then Alt-Z for X-ray, I can see the lights inside. Let's just select them and move them up. And then back to rendered mode so we can see the light's effects. The way these lights are positioned is based on a very traditional light system commonly used in movies, TV, and photography. We have a key light, a fill light, and a backlight. Starting with the key light, you want this to be your strongest. Down to the Object Data Properties tab here, I'm going to increase the power to something like 8,000. The fill and backlights you very generally want to have at half the power of your key light. So I'm going to make these both 4,000. If the shadows are too harsh, you can soften them by increasing the size of the lights here. Another way to get easy, realistic lighting effects is through the use of an HDRI. Up to the Shading tab, and then here, select World from the dropdown. Here you can set up a node system like this. I have a little tutorial I made a while back on how to add an HDRI in. Card should hopefully be above, or at least a link below. It is very simple, and there are a lot of tutorials on how to do this. Basically, first go to a website like HDRIhaven.com and download an HDRI image that you like. Then come back here and add an environment texture node. Then click Open and navigate to your HDRI image that you downloaded. Then just connect it up to the background node and you're done. Okay, and now finally to our last step, let's add in some color. Select the bear and then over to the Material tab on the right, let's click on the New button here. Double click on the name and I'm going to rename it brown. Then down to the base color field and changing it to a brown. Now I want the color of the pads, nose, and eyebrows to be the same, so I'm going to shift select all of them together, then click New over here on the right Material tab. I'm going to change it to something darker brown in the base color field. You'll notice only the eyebrows changed, and this is because the material only applies to the actively selected object. To have it be added to the other shift selected objects automatically, you can press Ctrl L for the Make Links menu and select Materials from the list. Now the other shift selected objects all have the same dark brown material. You can change the color of the tongue and the monkey Suzanne as well. Now for the eyes, let's select them and press / on the keyboard for local view. Then tab into edit mode. I'm going to click New in the Material tab over on the right and just leave it white. Now let's click on this little plus sign here to add a second material slot to the eye. Let's click New to add a new material to this new slot. And change the color to black for the pupil. To have the black show up, let's select the middle vertex here, and then you can press Ctrl and the plus sign on the numpad to increase your selection. You can also press the minus button to decrease your selection. Okay, I'll select the first couple of rows, and then with the black material selected, I'm going to press the Assign button here. Now only those vertices have the black material assigned to them, with the remainder still having the white material. / to get out of local view, I'm going to rotate the eyes down and inward to have the bear kind of looking at Suzanne the monkey in a sort of fun and cute way. Now to give the bear a little bit more of an interesting color, let's go over to the Shading tab again. Then let's change from World to Object if you aren't already there. Now just like the objects, you can press Shift A to add in a new node. Select the search function and type Gradient for the Gradient Texture node. Let's hook it up to the base color of the principled BSDF. Nothing seems to really happen. You can see a slight gradient on his right paw there, but nothing much. To fix this, let's Shift A, search, and type Color Ramp, and then slide it over the line in between the gradient texture and the principled BSDF, and it should automatically link up. Now when you play with the left black slider of the color ramp, you can see it directly correspond to the bear's body. It's not going in the right direction for me, so let's make use of the Node Wrangler add-on and press Ctrl T to quickly add in some texture mapping nodes. If we adjust the Z axis of the rotation field, you can see that the gradient turns. I'm going to change it to -90 degrees to have the gradient go up from the bottom of the bear. And now when I play with the left black slider of the color ramp, we get a nice effect on the body. I want my bear to be brown like before though, and not black and white. So I'm going to click on the left black slider and then change it from black to brown. Then click on the white slider on the right and then click on the color swatch at the bottom and change it to a lighter brown. And then you can also play with the roughness to make him less shiny if you'd like as well. And that's it for this video. I hope you found it helpful and maybe ended up with a bear like this. Couple of quick shoutouts. Shout out to Caesar Tamarel on Instagram, who accidentally sculpted this handsome Squidward and gave him a beautiful beard to boot. Great job, Caesar. Love the hair and the lighting. And to Orange3766 on Instagram, who sculpted this magnificent character, giving off some great Zelda vibes and completing it in just 48 hours. Nice work, Tomoya. Thanks guys for the shoutouts on Instagram. If you want to share your art or ask a question, I have a little Facebook group going. Link is below, or just give me a shout on social media somewhere. Twitter, Instagram, Discord. I started up a Twitch as well, but haven't really started streaming yet. I absolutely love seeing your guys' stuff. It always puts a huge smile on my face. Anyways, thanks for watching guys. I hope it helped, and see you in the next one.